All right, hello everyone. I just want to welcome you all to the MCC Art and Design Department's Visiting Artist Program. My name is Trevor Power. I'm the Art Gallery Curator here at McHenry County College. We're excited that you're here to listen to Trina May Smith talk about her work in the show that's upstairs currently in galleries 1 and 2. I want to take a moment to quickly thank the IT departments and event services for helping set this up, and Justin Schmitz for this amazing AV cart that you see here next to me. I'd also like to thank Daniela Broderick, the Dean of Arts and Humanities, for helping to continue programming like this. So thank you all. I'll start with a short bio to introduce Trina, and then get her up here. We can get this going. Originally from Missoula, Montana, Trina May Smith received her BFA in painting from the University of Washington, Seattle, and her MFA in 2D studio art from the University of Wisconsin Madison. Trina has been in numerous group and solo shows across the US, including exhibitions at Torrey Full Art Gallery, Abelman Contemporary, as well as being invited to exhibitions at institutions such as the Wright Museum in Wisconsin, Maine College of Arts, Mount Mary University in Wisconsin, and Monmouth College in Illinois. In addition, Trina is an assistant professor in painting at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh. I just want to take a quick moment to also recognize the fact that the work on display is, was created during the pandemic, and we're pretty much almost 3 years to the day from when the WHO declared COVID-19 a global pandemic. So I think it's like a really apt time to sort of really be reflecting on this time and this work and looking at everything. So yeah, if you'll please join me in welcoming Trina May Smith.
Right, so first I want to do some thank yous to Trevor and everyone involved in setting this up and having me here. Of all the shows that I've been in, I've been really impressed with just the attention to detail that Trevor has shown, and just in general, from the blankets, for the padding, for the cart, for the paintings, to all of the promotions and preparations. It's been a really great experience so far, and it's been really a pleasure. So thank you so much. All right, so as artists, I think that the work that sustains us has a it comes from this deep-rooted well inside of us. And even as younger artists, so all the students in the room, you're already making this work. You just don't see how it plays out until you made multiple bodies of work and made work over time. And when I'm in making this work, I've really seen how things are coming full circle. So for this talk, I thought it'd be really interesting to sort of take you on a bit of a journey through my work from the past 10 years and sort of draw some lineages of, those sort of full circle moments, and sort of how everything is kind of coming from the same place inside of me that really started when I was an undergrad. But I'm not going to start there because we only have so much time. But so I'm going to start with the work in graduate school, but I was really even thinking about, I can definitely draw connections to the work that I was doing in undergrad, and really realized that my serious work started in my undergraduate career. So, but over time, I've noticed that, so one thing that I've noticed, and that I would never have predicted, is that the fact that I'm from Missoula, Montana somehow is part of that well that I draw from. And so I think that's a significant factor. So I just think that showing you this is my hometown here, nestled there in the mountains in Montana, and where I'm from, and as part kind of deeply rooted for me. But the journey really starts in grad school. So I went to grad school, and I gave myself this rule that I couldn't keep making the work that I had been making before grad school. This is like maybe not the best idea. I don't think I'm giving you this advice. I'm just saying this is what I did. As I was like, I'm gonna kind of start fresh. I'm gonna use this as a sort of a incubus period to kind of create my greater self type of thing. And as what happened is I proceeded to make a lot of really, really bad paintings when I first got to grad school. I was doing some really interesting collaborative work with some of my peers, but the work that I was doing in my personal studio was failing terribly, and I was really stressed out and kind of freaking out, actually. So I went home for Christmas to Montana, and it just happened to be at that time that there was this factory, this paper factory closing. And I just became super fascinated with it. It was part of, and we grew up with this paper factory. It's like super, you could smell all the smells and all these things. And it was always this like place, this negative association. So at first I was like, yay, the factory is closing. But then I was there, and my sister lives very close to there, and you would drive by, and every time somebody had their last shift, they would hang their hard hat on the fence outside of the factory. And it was sort of this mourning of the loss of this factory. And then there was also all these interviews in the news and these articles in the paper. And I just kind of couldn't help myself. I was so interested. And I started just taking a ton of pictures of the closing of this factory. And it was actually the beginning of what ended up being the work that I pursued through my my graduate career. So it started with these pictures of sort of these romantic views of the factory, sort of thinking about this contradiction of sort of the thinking about sort of the beauty of these scenes, but also sort of thinking about the toxicity of them. I was making paintings like this where it's almost like bubblegum toxicity sort of thing, and sort of really thinking about color theory. And then with this one, really thinking about jewel tones and sort of thinking of them as these objects of desire. All of these paintings are very small. So this was like 9 inches by 12 inches, same about for this. But I was doing them really small on these really beautiful, I mean, not to be like, oh, I made them so beautiful, but like purposely making them out of these like really high-end birch plywood panels that were custom made. And so I kind of wanted them to think about them as like objects of desire. So kind of playing on ideas of intimacy and kind of shifting the idea of these spaces, but also sort of playing on sort of this idea of toxicity and whatnot. So at first it started here with just like the factory shots. But then as I started taking road trips all over the Midwest and also back in Montana, so I'd be going down to Gary, Indiana, which is pretty close to Madison. And I'd be like, I'm going to Gary, Indiana. Like I was the only, I mean, probably had said the only one ever in this current situation, right? But I would like joyfully go down there and I was just enamored and really kind of interested in these spaces. And so it was going down there, and then Cairo, Illinois, and back in Montana. I took trips to Detroit, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, like kind of the whole, I'd kind of just take trips around and take images and use images, those photos for the work. So as I went to these spaces, I got more interested in thinking about the abandoned houses, because the factory scenes really spoke of industry, but the houses really spoke of people. And I thought that was really interesting, this more personal take on it, and kind of how all of these things are really interconnected. I made probably 30 to 40 painting of these house portraits at the time. Many of them, again, these are all very small. This one is actually even smaller. This one's maybe 6 inches by 10 inches, something like that. So really intimate. And images like this. So doing a lot of these house portraits, thinking about sort of this idea of people migrating, and when industry changes, so do people's lives, right? So, and then I was in doing these house portraits, I was really thinking also about kind of expanding that notion of this like loss of place. and thinking about, so I did this, like, I kind of did this like little sub-series of these houses on fire. And the images for these house fire paintings are the only ones that I didn't take myself. So through all of my work, I usually like to do the photographic myself, but I was like not interested in being an ambulance chaser, none of that. It was more just thinking about this metaphor and broadening the idea that that this loss of home could happen. It really can happen to anyone. And sort of this idea of this accelerated idea of it and this intensity of what that means. So kind of liked that idea of kind of putting these in the mix as sort of that commentary. I also like the idea of the way that we normalize some of these things, right? So like a house fire seems really intense when we think of one, but when you see 12 of them, 12 repeated images of them, it becomes, and another fire, and another fire, oh, and another fire, right? So like it kind of has this way with repetition that, and this idea of normalization, which is true in the way that industries move and affects people's lives. We're like, oh yeah, of course, that industry moves, so I guess they'll have to move too, and so there's this normalization of these really traumatic things that happen socially. So I just have a few of these. And I'm kind of going through these initial series really fast. I did lots, like I said, I did like 12 of these. I did like 30 to 40 of the house portraits, and then lots of other iterations through that body of work. But just to kind of give you some ideas of what I was thinking about. I was also in traveling around, I would have these different experiences in different towns, right? So this is actually 3 details of one painting. So it was a 20-foot painting that I created about my experience in Gary, Indiana. So as you're driving around Gary, because it's been sort of declining for many, many years, there's this way in which there's these spaces between, so there'll be like this neighborhood, but then there'll be like this big field, and you'll be like, oh, that's interesting. But it used to be houses. It's just that they've all been torn down. And so it's like these strange spaces that don't make sense, but it's because that's not how that area was originally designed. So it kind of looks rural, but it's really just because of the decay. So I was thinking about the spaces between, and so I was making this long piece where it's experiential, that you're walking along and kind of experiencing over time and discovering over time. Like the more you look at it, the more you notice there's like the little walkways that used to lead to houses that now lead to nothing. There's strange perspectives in different places. And I was kind of like composing this intentionally to kind of have it feel like it makes sense at first, but then upon further investigation, things are amiss. And then you kind of discover more as you look more. And actually did this, was part of my MFA show in grad school. And it just coincidentally, there was a, which is just kind of an interesting little side note, but a guy from Detroit in the grad program, and he was working in an area, our paths didn't really cross. I was a 3rd year, he was a 1st year, and I maybe interacted with once or twice, but he didn't know my work at all. So he had come into the gallery and walked in, and he was like, oh, I get what this is, right? So there's this kind of this interesting thing that happens that for him, growing up in Detroit, he like knew exactly what this painting was about. And I thought that was really interesting too. It's like anything, like if the work hits somebody, it hits a chord with somebody, they kind of have a deeper understanding of it or a different type of understanding of it. And I kind of like how this type of work, these constructed spaces were functioning in that way because they had these interpretive reads. So I was doing kind of some smaller work like that too, right after grad school, was interested in these constructed compositions where I was thinking about formal elements too, and thinking about that, there's these houses in Butte, Montana, and there's these houses in Detroit, and these houses in Gary, Indiana, but in a way it's like it's all the same thing, right? And so it's almost like this idea of everywhere. These things are happening everywhere. And so taking houses deliberately from these different places, putting them together based on my own visual interests, and kind of, again, playing with this idea of repetition, and this longer format. So you're kind of reading them as that repetition. And then just, again, kind of putting things together that at first it feels like it makes sense, but with further investigation, you see that it doesn't actually make sense. So kind of playing with those sorts of ideas. And then as I was doing this work, so probably 5 years into making this body of work, I started to really think about ideas of signification. So like, how much can I take away and still talk about these ideas? So I started making these larger works. So this is like 5 feet tall by like, I don't know, 2.5 feet wide. And where it's just isolating that boarded door or boarded window. And so I was really interested in the fact that boarded windows essentially signify abandonment, right? Or decay in some way and that sort of thing. So I was excited about this notion of taking everything else away, allowing those things to be the significations to function as far as urban decay and industrial decline, but then also to be painting a little bit bigger and be able to speak a little bit more about sort of just like painting, right? So these became to me sort of like a color field. Certainly thinking about artists like such as Rothko, if you're familiar with Rothko or Diebenkorn, and these sorts of kind of color field artists. I think this one, you can kind of really feel that sense of a color field in this one. And this one is like a 3 foot by 3 foot. So these are all kind of more like the size that the door, or 1-to-1 ratio with a person, or pretty close to what the size of the actual circumstance would have been if you were standing in front of that door in real life. So here's another one. This one's it's also 5 foot tall, but like 3 feet wide, something like that. Again, really thinking about color theory, really kind of playing that up a bit and exercising my more painterly qualities in the work, having it feel a little bit more experiential, having it feel a little bit more tangible, which certainly has lineage to my current work that I'm sure maybe if you've seen in the gallery. So from there, I was really interested. I became more and more interested about signification and was sort of letting go of the urban decay and industrial decline. And was really just thinking about how these visual cues play into the structure of our lives as we travel around the social and physical environment. So I was taking images such as this of these traffic cones that were they were like either done doing their job, something, or they were about to do, some type of job, right? But they seemed like they were in wait to me, wait to be picked up or wait to be implemented. And so I started thinking about kind of like what would happen if I put them somewhere else. So I put them in like this forest scene. And I really like the fact that it's like those silly cones are trying to be trees, so it kind of, to me, felt kind of like ironic or humorous, but I also was like, I don't know, why are those cones in that forest? Do not mess with those trees, and kind of also kind of brought up this idea of defensiveness for them, and really kind of played into this duality, which again is kind of leading back to what I was thinking about in the Urban Decay series, sort of this this tension between, sort of in like these industries that provide these jobs and these livelihoods for people that people rely on is so significant, right? But also have like this impact on the environment. So it's like kind of this sort of this duality that's in play. So here, the tension between sort of like seems kind of funny, like, oh, they're trying to impersonate the trees, but also brings for me as the creator, the tension of not wanting them to be there, that man-made signification in that forest. So this one as well. And so when I was doing these, I started to have this craving to make a painting that represented my longing for the mountains. Because ever since I moved away from the Pacific Northwest, which is when I came to grad school, I moved away. I just kind of, and I didn't expect it. Like I really didn't think, I consider myself a pretty flexible individual. And I was like, oh, I'll be fine. But then I just had this like visceral reaction to being away from the mountains. And it just kind of at first it was really intense and then it sort of subsided, but it was always kind of presence, always kind of there. And it was something that I always kind of was in the back of my mind, right? So I was like, well, okay, this idea of these forests are coming up, right? And so maybe I'll try to make a painting about this. I don't have an image of it, but I'm just going to describe it because I think it'll be really interesting to kind of like compare back to what I'm doing now. So is what I did is I had an image of a river scene right outside of Missoula where I lived at the Clark Fork River. And I took it and blew it up at Kinko's large scale. And then I took a piece of plastic sheeting, just like that you would wrap something in, or like for painting, right? For protect your floors for painting, and kind of made it so that it was like kind of wrinkled in some places where it was like further away from the image. So you would kind of obscure it and be kind of this wrinkled form, and then other places where it gets closer to the image and then you could see the image through it. And then I was doing a painting of that setup. And I worked on it for quite a while and just was like, this is not working. This is not working. It just feels contrived. It feels like a still life, which is not what I do. And I was like, all right, this isn't working. But so I just kind of scrapped it, sanded it down. And, but it was always in the back of my mind that someday I wanted to figure out how to make that painting. And apparently it took a pandemic in order for me to figure out how to make that painting. But so that was like years ago that I was kind of trying. But I was like, okay, never mind with that. I'm going to keep going with this idea of signage. So I saw this sign that looked very much like this in my travels to Milwaukee. And it was actually when there's a lot of road construction going on. And the reason it stuck out to me is because it was super confusing right where the sign was. And I was like, oh, thanks for nothing sign. Like supposedly you're going to help me here, but there's no help because it's all covered up. And, you know, it's like this idea that it's supposed to be informative has been taken away by, because of whoever decided at what time, you know, so someone's deciding these things and things are shifting and these signs are not helpful, that kind of a thing. So that became really interesting to me, just as far as the way that we navigate environment and navigate social circumstance. And so that's kind of where my mind started going, is just seeing signage as metaphor. And in this case, like this piece is titled Landscape 1. So you can see that there's like that really small condensed landscape on the just the 1-inch border on the outside, right? So the landscape is being obscured by the sign. The information on the sign is being obscured by the powers that be, right? Because things are shifting and changing. And all of these things are sort of not able to function to their design. So this one is also similarly where I came across a sign pretty close to this, took an image and then took a bunch of liberties with it. But this one I really like because it kind of really has this sense of this remnant, so like this residue of time. So at one time there was lodging, but there's not anymore. Oh, there used to be a gas station, but there's not anymore, right? So it kind of has like this memory of times past and this idea of shifting culture, shifting opportunities, shifting social circumstance, etc. And I really liked that idea. Again, sort of this idea that the sign is for blue is kind of signified as services, but unfortunately there's no more services, right? So again, kind of obscuring that landscape. And at this time I was traveling around kind of thinking about taking imagery of signage and thinking about that, but also roadside memorials became really interesting to me as I was just traveling around. And in fact, roadside memorials is something that were interesting to me as a young person as well. Growing up in Montana, whenever there's a death on the freeway or the highways, they would put like a white cross. There's like this program that was instated, and there would be a white cross, and then people would, you know, personalize those memorials, those roadside memorials. And that was always really, as a kid, I just always noticed those. And so when I was starting the signage series, I started to notice them again. So I took a bunch of images and thought I was going to do paintings about roadside memorials. But let me tell you, if anybody figures out how to do a painting about a roadside memorial that's more interesting or equally interesting to the memorial itself, I want to see that painting. It's very difficult because the memorials themselves are so intense and so personal, and they're almost like artworks in and of themselves. And so I didn't feel like it was interesting to me, but I didn't feel like the way that I was wanting to approach it was holding my interest, because I felt like I never could get it as good as the site themselves, right? But then I started kind of pulling some of the things out, like the balloons. So you see, I'm sure when they first put up there, they were like flying and like happy birthday, memory, and then they get sad, and then there's like almost extra sad, right? Like happy birthday. And I thought that signification was interesting in and of itself. So like paintings like this, I would just be composing them completely. I wouldn't be using a photo reference. I would just be designing them in Photoshop and through sketches and whatnot. And then creating the paintings of them. I was also doing satellite paintings of just sort of these isolated elements. So like these happy birthday balloons being extra sad, and just letting them function on their own. And paintings like this, where I would go and I kind of created the still life of the flowers that I worked from, and kind of constructing these things and thinking about these. This is like it's a bouquet, but it's not a bouquet. It's a wreath, but it's not a wreath. So having sort of those social significations of things like events that bring people together, weddings, funerals, these sorts of celebrations of various kinds, and having it have those significations, but never really being exactly that thing. So that, again, the viewer is then having to come to some conclusions about what these different visual inclinations add up to. This one's about 3 foot. This one's 3 foot by 3 foot. I saw you. Yeah. So all of these landscape ones, these ones I've been showing are all 3 foot by 3 foot. The happy birthday, just the balloon one, is smaller. It's like 14 inches by 18 inches, about there. Yeah, great. And so I was constructing these. I did many of these. So I did lots of these constructed signs, thinking about the different things, like what does color signify? What does the physicality of the paint signify? So this one's not so much, but you can see, sorry, I'm just going to hop back really quickly. So this one, you can kind of see some of that really thicker paint. So I'm really thinking of the painting itself as a landscape as well. So there's like these different surfaces. So where it's kind of matte, where it's the rectangles that are covering the sign are really thick and put on with like a palette knife sort of thing. And then the background area is just like painted. You can really feel or sense that surface of the canvas. So it kind of has this very subtle topographical quality that I'm thinking of as well. When you see them in person, you can kind of see on this one that like the background color has like a more brushed quality, and then there's some other things happening in those other areas. All right, so at this time in making this body of work, I had moved to Milwaukee, and I was commuting to work because I teach at UW Oshkosh. I was commuting from Milwaukee to Oshkosh 4 days a week. That's a lot of driving, a lot of moving through the environment. But it was great for this body of work because it gave me this like built-in time to think about signage and navigation, and kind of like I would find these things and have these moments of inspiration. But then and one of those things that I was seeing, this is an unfinished painting. This is the painting I was working on right when the pandemic happened, and I ended up not finishing it. But I would travel when I would be coming back into Milwaukee. There is this building of this huge window, like really the whole front of the building was a window of glass using glass blocks. And so there would be like the information behind it would kind of feel obscured and have this like orb quality to it. And it was really intriguing to me, especially a lot of times I'd be driving back and it would be dark and it would be like this bright kind of beacon. I'd be like, the window. And it would like be like this, like it was just kind of called to me. And I was like, all right, that's it. I'm going to do a painting about that window and kind of think about why that's so interesting to me. And so this was kind of like, I would say this is like, I don't know, maybe just based in. I was going to have a lot more plans for it, but then the pandemic happened and I was stuck in my apartment, just like we all were, right? And it became, and I lived by myself at the time. And so I was just like walking in circles around my apartment. It was as much as I was traveling through the world, right? And it just kind of, it was too hard to make work about what it is to like signification of moving through the world when you're stuck in your apartment 24/7 by yourself. So I just was like, I can't, I just have to try to make work about this experience. And I just felt really compelled. So I was like, well, all right, I'm going to go to Home Depot, put on my mask and, kind of went to Home Depot and bought a privacy glass block and started taking pictures of my apartment through that block. So that's how this new this current body of work that's in this show originated, is just out of like the pandemic shifting so dramatically, the line of thinking that I had before not making sense to me anymore, and then just kind of out of necessity to kind of keep my ideas going. And so I was like, I'm just going to try this and see what happens. And it ended up feeling very fruitful for me. So started with these images where I was taking images of my apartment and really thinking about the glass block as a kind of a dual metaphor as barrier and lens. So really thinking of this idea of accessibility to my space. So because of the parameters of the pandemic, I was the only one that could theoretically access my space. And so it was a way to sort of share it, but also kind of in a way that kind of paralleled the way it felt to me, which is like this sort of kaleidoscopic, distorted, warped sense of my own space that now has become, went from being my home space to being my work and studio and, all the things. So kind of how strange that felt. And in these initial ones, and I think it was a good inclination to really show the edges of the block, because I think that there is this idea of there being this interior exterior, and I was interested in that idea of being on the outside and only being able to kind of peer and get glimpses or minimal understanding of the inside. But I also didn't want the glass block edges themselves to be the framing. So I put that other framing, that in this case, that green around the edge, kind of playing this on the notion of the painting being container. So kind of like acknowledging it as a painting instead of allowing the edges of the glass block or the illustration of the glass block to kind of feel like a framing. So just kind of play on that idea of container, but then also just like that acknowledge of it being a painting of a concept or an idea. But at first I was including those edges of the block, thinking about them. These are in the show. So the last one was 3 foot by 3 foot. This one's 30 inches by 30 inches. And just kind of getting a handle on how and why I was interested in it, kind of thinking about how things are and aren't recognizable or familiar. So in this case, it's of like my bookshelf, which kind of seems right. People often can be like, oh, it seems like a bookshelf maybe, and they kind of sense the plant and some type of spatial reality. But where it's also can be seen as an abstraction. But then from there, I was interested in really thinking about, okay, well, I'm interested in this concept and thinking about them as sort of these metaphors and the idea of the painting as container. But I also am really just interested, I think the most compelling thing is just the experiential quality. So I did some studies, which is a common part of my practice, where I'll be like, do some works on paper to kind of work through some ideas quickly and see what I think about them, and then kind of think about what size is right for this idea. How do I want to how can I maximize whatever inclination I have for the next move. And so I took away the edges, but like just leaving sort of that condensed element at the very edges where the block kind of goes into that sort of the edge there. And it almost becomes, it's almost like all the information sort of lives in those edges too, which I was interested in for leaving them there. And then kind of that distorted feel inside. So it just becomes about the experience of that distortion and that distorted reality. And I did like it. I was like, okay, I think this is interesting, but I think that they need to be bigger than the ones that I was doing before. So that's how I landed on the 5 foot by 5 foot size, because I really wanted them to be, again, sort of 1-to-1 ratio, sort of back in line with sort of how Rothko was thinking about his sizing, and really thinking about when you're in front of it, it kind of takes up your scope, depending on how close you are, but that it also feels, it doesn't feel like it's like over, you don't have to like move to take it all in at the same time. So so from these was deciding to move and make the larger 5 foot by 5 foot size ultimately. And then, but at the same time, I was really addicted to my plants. I mean, I'm sure a lot of you could, I mean, I don't know what happened with the plant thing during the pandemic, but it was like, I just couldn't help myself. I was so excited about my plants. I would take care of them so diligently. I would show them off during Zoom meetings like they were my kids. I don't even know. And I'm not a great, I'm okay with plants, but somehow I became really involved with them and wanted to do portraits of them. So I originally wanted to do portraits of all 14 of my plants, but I only ended up doing these 3, 2 of which are in the show. But just as sort of these moments, these legible sort of moments within that distortion. And so then I did, this was the first large painting I did, and it really did feel right. I was like, okay, this is kind of where I want to go with this body of work, this experiential quality, this fleshing out of sort of these visual relationships, these details. You can see that there's actually a table. People kind of read this as a chair, which is fine, but there's like this table that's sort of recognizable, and these 2 plants up further, and you can kind of sense the window. So there's this recognizability at the same time that it's putting you into this experiential place, this this uncertain, this shifting, this altered place, which to me is what it felt like in my apartment. This one is of my bedroom, similarly. And this one I was really interested too in sort of those kind of teal and greens sort of reflecting on the surface, that like acknowledgement of that surface, and kind of that play on, again, that the block as sort of barrier, as lens. And then as the pandemic kept shifting, it became, and my ideas shifted with it, in a sense that it became less about just that like initial shock of being in my apartment all the time, to kind of really noticing how it's affecting societies and like around the world, really. And so thinking about how celebrations had changed. So this was based on an image of my Christmas tree. And just on a personal note, I have the Christmas tree that my grandmother used to have. So so there's an extra, just to me, sentimentality with that particular tree itself. But how, you know, we weren't able to gather like we used to, like all of our social structures have been disrupted and diminished in a certain type of way. And so kind of making work about that with this Christmas tree painting. And then also, a lot of you, some of you have probably seen the hope hearts around. So when I'd go for walks, I would see the hope hearts on the windows, thinking about kind of like we're all in it together, and kind of for the first responders and whatnot. So people were putting these hearts on their windows all over the world as a signification for those ideas. And kind of just wanting to celebrate this idea that there's hope, that we're in it together, and we can do it as a, we can get through this type of thing. So I made this painting based on that. And then, but it was interesting then, because as time went on, again, things shifted as things opened up a little bit more, that sort of thing. But again, by myself, padding around my apartment in circles is what it felt like. And deprived of the things that I love, sort of being in this depressed state, like even teaching, having to teach remotely, you know, the best part of my job teaching is that I get to work with students, not having that ability, not being able to do social things, not being able to go to art openings and whatnot, not being able to have those cultural experiences, and being out in the world, which are always so important to me. That deep-rooted longing that I have for the mountains really came to the surface of my psyche. And it was like almost, it intensified so dramatically because I think just didn't have the other things to sort of distract and pacify myself with. And so I started noticing that deep-rooted quality in that deep-rooted essence. And I was thinking about the mountains all the time. And I was like, I think I want to try to make that painting again, right? So I was going home for the summer, and so when I did these hikes, so these are just some shots that I wanted to show you, just some regular images that I was doing. This is like an alpine hike. This is right outside of my hometown, so literally the trailheads for these hikes were like a half hour from my mom's house. So literally the landscape I grew up in. This is one of my favorite alpine hikes. This is one of the valley hikes that is right close in the Bitterroots. And this is like, here's us hiking with the blocks as I took it in my backpack and took it trekking up in the mountains with me, and would be taking these images through the block of the mountains, of the scenery that I was experiencing in those hikes. So you can see how like this exact spot actually was where I took the image that inspired this piece. And so in doing these paintings, I was definitely referencing the images from the blocks, but then also taking liberties. So like kind of editing them in various ways based on my interest in the way things were stacking up visually, and then colors and stuff like that. So, but you can kind of see it, you can kind of have a sense of the essence of this space and this depiction here in this image. And I was really interested in it then doing how it felt to me, right? That like there are times obviously in the summer where I get to go and I get to be in these spaces, but the rest of the year kind of feels like this to me, where it's like, I'm almost like this idea of longing. And I did a bunch of research on this, the notion of longing too. Like the idea of longing is that it's something that is very tangible, that you're wanting this from past, present, or future, but that is not easily attainable. And that the longing itself becomes sort of a sense of pleasure of some kind, like a happiness of some kind, right? And that you're kind of holding on to these ideas, and that the longing, kind of like an anticipation, right? Like I know that when I am going on a big trip or something, or like when I was younger, especially Halloween, getting ready for Halloween and getting my costume together was almost as fun as the event, right? So there's this sense of like this joy that happens even in the longing itself. And that it has like this separation from that tangible actual experience. And so to me, we're doing a good job of representing what that feels like when I'm not in those, literally in those spaces. Here's another one of those. This one is not in this show, but another one that I did at that time. And this one, it really has a detail that really shows you, in this one where I was really thinking about that tangibility, really thinking about what the paint can do to kind of have this sense of reality. And there's these moments where the paint gets thinner and thicker in this painting in particular that really felt like it was in line with kind of how I was thinking about that longing for that tangible, those tangible qualities. And then just some more snapshots of sort of, this is a little hidden lake that's up that I really love to go up to. And a fire went through there. So it's like, has this really beautiful kind of strange quality to it because of these burned out trees and whatnot. And this is the work on paper that's in the show. This is a painting from that hike as well, with the burned out trees and just the kind of the kaleidoscopic quality that's happening with those images there. And then sort of some ideas of sort of that quality or that experience of the valley hikes. This piece is in the show. This is just a snapshot from my studio. I don't have a better image of it quite yet, because it's mainly been out of my studio since then. But I'm on the fence about this one. So if anybody has a thought on this, I think it might be slightly too representational. That's my thought on this one. That mountain just is the atmospheric perspective is just a little too good. It's a little too legible, but I think it was an interesting one to do, just to kind of see the contrast of when it gets a little more legible, if that still is creating that tension. So let me know what you think. And then I have this favorite, this is like a massive granite slab, and I think it's amazing. And so this is one of my favorite spaces in the Bitterroots. And so had a painting that I did based on that space. And just kind of, again, kind of almost like holding these spaces with me, right? Like as I'm making the paintings, also kind of re-engaging with those spaces, re-engaging with my time that I've spent in those spaces, and understanding kind of my love of them, and kind of creating the energy that I feel when I'm in those spaces. And then this is actually incomplete. This is what I'm doing in my studio right now. So this is a in-process shot of the painting that I'm working on currently. It's also a 5 foot by 5 foot. And I'm at a really interesting place in this series of work at this point, because it's been 3 years. I've been using this glass block as sort of this metaphor for 3 years now. And I feel like the glass block has maybe run its course. I think that there's, you know, as a metaphor, I think it worked really well when we're in the throes of the pandemic, but now we're pretty well coming out of it. Life feels more like, you know, more familiar, going back to how it was before. And it kind of feels like that metaphor isn't quite needed anymore, but I'm still interested in this idea of longing and of the mountains. So this summer is, I'm giving myself one of those rules again. I'm going to let go of the block, and I'm actually going to, I've already planned a 2-month trip out west to Montana, Idaho, and Seattle. I'm going to do a bunch of hiking and camping, and I'm going to do on-site, so plein air work research. And so I'm going to do actual on-site research that I will then, and I'm hoping to make like, I don't know, 40 to 50, like some very quick and some maybe 2 to 3 hours at the most, studies that I will then take back as research to kind of keep making this idea of this body of work. But like I said, letting go of the block and kind of moving on from that notion of the pandemic, but kind of allowing that lineage to persevere with kind of the thinking behind the longing. So that's sort of where I'm at right now in the work, and that's what's coming next. And that's what I have. So I think, but it's so, I guess, like, just to wrap that all up, so interesting to me how the work now still feels very similar to the way I was thinking and what was interesting to me, even in undergrad. And sort of the ways that I am composing things, the ways that kind of the kind of key elements that come up again and again, I really feel like there's like this cyclical quality to them. And I think that's really exciting. And that's, so just, you know, wherever you're at in your process, like as students, you're doing it now, right? Like take the work that you're doing now really seriously, because it's gonna, if you keep making work, you'll see that you're already doing it. You're already making the work, which I think is exciting. All right. That's it. That's all I have.
In your process a little more in terms of you have this photographing thing. And then are you freehanding? Are you projecting? Are you gridding? I'm just curious how, because it's so abstract.
Yeah.
That's getting that.
Yeah, so the question is, how do I translate the image? How do I, is there, what process am I using to translate from the images? For the big ones, I do project them initially. I just feel like I want to get to the painting as soon as possible. And like, I really feel like I'm already thinking about the painting when I take the images. So a lot of things are already happening there. I also sometimes push things around, play with things, even in Photoshop, do some other, maybe some other sketches and stuff, and then kind of project and kind of get the big movements down and then let myself take liberties later if I want. But to me, it's just a way of like getting to the painting, which is, I think, the fun part. So with these, I predominantly project them initially. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah. Yeah, I have that. The question is, have I ever thought of making paintings where elements within the paintings are really clear and like photorealist type of thing, and others are falling apart? I have actually thought about that a lot. I'm working on just like a work on paper right now where I did that, where I took an image to the block, and then I also took just a regular image deliberately from the very same place, and I was kind of like intermeshing them, so that in parts it was legible and like very like naturalistic, and then it would like be falling apart. So I actually have started something like that, in fact, and I see myself doing that more. Like I see myself doing that more in the future. Yeah. So absolutely. Yeah. How often do I work from a still life? It's been a long time since I've worked from a still life. Yeah, I don't really work from a still life anymore. But I guess I did elements with the sign series. So like I created that element of the flowers. I had the actual balloons that I was using for the signage. And I was like, yeah, going around buying all kinds of mylar balloons and actually had those in person. But yeah, I haven't fully worked from a still life for a while. Yeah.
It seems like transitions are a major part of your art, the way that you your art, whether that be the transition from home to mowing. How was the transition out of the pandemic and like the staying at home has affected your view of your art now?
Yeah. So just to kind of repeat the question for people. So transitions, I would agree, transitions are very significant in my work, and I kind of almost can't help but to like respond to them in my life, apparently. As far as how I'm transitioning now, I think that this realization that I need to let go of the block is, I think, the next transition. I think that I don't want it to get to the point where the block becomes a crutch for me, you know, that I'm like, oh, I'm gonna take the block over here and I'm gonna take it over there, and it becomes sort of like this forced thing. And so I think that that's the thing that I'm noticing recently, is that I gotta it feels right to let it go, and to kind of, and you know, I've actually never done research like that, where I go and do plein air work and then work from that. So that's like a big question mark for me. It's like very exciting, but very nerve-wracking because I've never worked that way. But it just feels like the right thing to me. It's what my brain is handing me. It's like, hey, I think this is the way, the next thing you should try, right? And so I just have to try it and hope for the best, right? So I think that's is that answering your question? Yeah, so, and I think that as an artist, I'm willing to take risks. I think that can feel really hard because you kind of get a good groove going, like the Urban Decay series, like people love that work. I mean, I sold all of those paintings, right? I don't know, they were just very popular and that sort of thing. And I could have kept making that work and, you know, having that success, but I kind of got bored of it, right? So I was like, well, this is terrible. If I'm bored of it, I'm gonna make bad paintings, right? So then I was like, okay, well, I have to make a shift. And so I'm willing to take those risks. So doing this feels like a risk like that, like going up and doing the plein air things and kind of working in a way that I've never worked and seeing what happens. But I think that it keeps it exciting, it keeps it real. And I feel like I'm going to do whatever I can to make the authentic work that feels right to me. And so that's kind of that next leap of faith that I'm going to have to take. Yeah. That's it. Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you all again for coming, and we have